In April last year, a massive cargo ship slowly approached a Chinese port. On board were 300,000 tons of soybeans, enough to feed millions of livestock, enough to move global prices. The ship had crossed the ocean, burned fuel for more than 10 days, and passed every checkpoint along the way. The paperwork was clean, the labels were clear. The document said one simple thing: product of Argentina. But something unexpected happened. Almost immediately after arrival, Chinese customs rejected the entire shipment. No unloading, no negotiations, just a firm refusal. That decision stunned the shipping company, exporters, and traders watching from around the world. China is the largest soybean buyer on Earth. Argentina is a major soybean exporter. And at that moment, China needed soybeans badly. So why turn this ship away? This wasn't spoiled cargo. It wasn't a paperwork mistake. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Yet Chinese customs concluded that these soybeans were not Argentine at all, and were most likely from the United States. That raised two unsettling questions. If China desperately needs soybeans, why reject such a massive shipment? And more importantly, how did China know something was wrong? To understand why China would make such a hard decision, we need to zoom out. China is actually very secure when it comes to food, but only on the surface. Rice, wheat, and corn, the three main staple foods, are mostly produced at home. In normal years, China can feed itself just fine. Soybeans are different. Soybeans aren't just something people eat directly. They are crushed into cooking oil, turned into animal feed, and used across food processing and industry. If soybeans stop flowing, meat prices rise. Eggs get more expensive. Cooking oil costs more. And when food prices rise in a country of 1.4 billion people, social pressure rises with them. That's why soybeans are China's biggest agricultural weakness. Every year, China imports over 100 million tons of soybeans. In fact, soybeans alone make up about 2/3 of all China's grain imports. Put simply, for every 3 ships carrying grain into China, 2 are carrying soybeans. This means even a small disruption doesn't stay small. It spreads through farms, factories, supermarkets, and households. So when Chinese customs inspect soybeans, they aren't just checking food, they're guarding economic stability. That's why, in China's system, soybeans are treated not as a simple crop, but as a strategic resource, one that cannot be compromised, mislabeled, or manipulated. And this is exactly why the rejected ship mattered so much, because it arrived at the worst possible moment. That moment came during a rapidly escalating trade war. When Donald Trump returned to office, China was once again labeled the United States' biggest economic threat. Tariffs followed quickly. First 10%, then 50%, then over 100%. By April, some Chinese goods entering the United States were facing tariffs of more than 200%. Beijing didn't stay silent. China struck back with tariffs on energy, agriculture, vehicles, and key materials. Coal, natural gas, crude oil, machinery, meat, all were pulled into the fight. And before long, soybeans became one of the biggest casualties. Here's the contradiction that broke the system. China stopped buying United States soybeans to avoid feeding money into tariffs. But the United States had a serious problem. There is no other buyer on Earth that can replace China at that scale. American farmers kept planting, harvests kept coming, silos filled up, prices fell, inventory piled higher every month. Meanwhile, China was still the world's largest soybean buyer, just no longer from the United States. This created a pressure cooker. On one side, American exporters desperate to sell. On the other, China unwilling to buy directly. And when politics slams the front door shut, trade doesn't stop. It looks for a back door. That's when some people decided to get creative. Under the pressure of unsold inventory, some United States soybean traders made a risky choice. Instead of shipping soybeans straight to China, they sent them south, to South America. The plan was simple on paper. First, ship American soybeans to countries like Argentina or Brazil. Second, unload them, repackage the beans, and swap out the bags. Third, prepare new certificates of origin stating the soybeans were locally produced. Finally, export them to China as Argentine or Brazilian goods. To customs officers reading the documents, everything looked clean. The paperwork matched, the stamps were in place, the route made sense, but in reality, this wasn't normal trade. It was origin laundering, the same idea as money laundering, but with food. The goal wasn't efficiency, it was disguise. And the biggest test of this scheme came in April. A cargo ship carrying 300,000 tons of soybeans arrived at a Chinese port. Every label said "Made in Argentina." The certificates were complete. Nothing appeared suspicious at first glance. But once Chinese inspectors began their routine checks, the story started to crack. Something about these soybeans didn't match where they were supposed to come from. Chinese customs didn't rely on a single clue. They peeled the disguise off layer by layer. First, biology. Soybeans grow differently depending on soil, climate, and farming methods. One of the clearest signals is protein content. Argentine soybeans usually stay below 34% protein. That's normal for their environment. But when inspectors tested this shipment, the numbers didn't fit. The protein content came back at 35.1%, a level that closely matches soybeans grown in the U.S. Midwest, not Argentina. It was like checking a person's accent and realizing it doesn't match their passport. Second, logistics. Inspectors then looked at the physical packaging. The sacks used to transport the soybeans were traced back to U.S. manufacturers. That alone didn't prove guilt, but it added another crack to the story. Shipping routes were also reviewed. The timing and movements of the vessel didn't fully line up with standard Argentine export patterns. Third, technology. This is where the net closed. Chinese customs analyzed GPS tracking data, ran mass spectrometry traceability tests, and compared 12 separate indicators, from chemical signatures to transport behavior. All of it was processed through an AI system upgraded in 2024, with a traceability accuracy rate of around 98%. Each test pointed in the same direction. The paperwork said Argentina. The data said United States. That's the lesson here. You can fake documents, but you can't fake biology, physics, and data at the same time. With the evidence clear, Chinese customs rejected the entire shipment and sent it back. 300,000 tons, no exceptions. But this wasn't the first time this had happened. When the April shipment was exposed, Chinese customs weren't surprised, because they had seen this play before. In 2024, another shipment, 200,000 tons of soybeans labeled as Argentine, arrived at a Chinese port. On paper, everything was perfect. But within 48 hours, customs confirmed the beans actually came from the U.S. Midwest. The same thing happened again with soybeans disguised as Brazilian. Some exporters even tried mixing U.S. beans with local Brazilian soybeans, hoping the blend would hide the origin. It didn't work. The chemical fingerprints still gave them away. The reason these tricks fail is simple. China no longer treats origin checks as paperwork. It treats them as systems engineering. Today, every major soybean shipment entering China must carry a digital birth certificate. That includes the exact planting plot, the harvest date, the transport route, and pricing data compared against global averages. If a route behaves strangely, or if prices move in ways that don't match market conditions, the system flags the shipment automatically. This isn't emotional enforcement, it's procedural. China isn't reacting case by case. It's enforcing a rule-based system designed to make origin fraud almost impossible. Once the truth came out, the damage spread fast. And not just to the people who tried to cheat. Argentina was hit first. Even though Argentina wasn't the one growing the U.S. soybeans, its name was on the paperwork. Chinese buyers immediately paused or suspended contracts, not because they wanted to punish Argentina, but because trust had been shaken. For a country where over 70% of soybean exports go to China, that pause was serious. Argentine officials filed complaints, estimated losses at around $200 million, and warned that their country's reputation as a reliable exporter was at risk. Brazil felt the pressure next. China began warning exporters that any resale or mixing of U.S. soybeans would lead to quota cuts, stricter inspections, or extra tariffs. Brazil had no choice but to cooperate more closely because losing access to China's market would be far more costly than enforcing stricter controls. And in the United States, the problem never went away. Farmers were still stuck with excess soybeans. Storage costs kept rising. Prices stayed under pressure. With China's system tightening and South American routes closing, there were fewer and fewer places left to send the crop. That's the real irony. The people who planned the scheme didn't just fail, they made things worse for everyone else. Because once trust is broken, even innocent exporters start paying the price. And that leads to the bigger question. Who actually loses when trade wars spiral this far? At first glance, trade wars look like battles between governments. Tariffs are announced in press conferences. Numbers are debated in meetings. Leaders talk about strategy and leverage. But the real impact shows up somewhere else. It shows up when food prices rise, because imports become more expensive. It shows up when small businesses lose margins, because costs climb faster than they can raise prices. And it shows up when farmers and exporters, who have nothing to do with politics, are left holding unsold goods. The rejected soybean ship is a perfect example. It wasn't just a cargo problem. It was a signal. A signal that shortcuts are easier to detect than ever. A signal that data now speaks louder than paperwork. And a signal that in today's global trade system, trust is the most valuable currency of all. In this chess game between nations, politicians move the pieces, but ordinary people pay the bill. So I want to ask you, have you felt the impact of rising prices or trade restrictions in your own life? If you want more stories that break down how geopolitics quietly affects everyday reality, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because behind every headline, there's a real story, and we're here to tell it.